It was a typical Wednesday evening when I returned home from work. The day had been long, and all I wanted was to kick back and relax with Sarah, my wife of 7 years. As I approached the front door, I heard hushed whispers coming from inside. The sound was barely audible, like secrets shared in the dead of night. My heart raced as I cautiously entered the house. The living room light was dim, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The soft murmurs grew louder as I moved closer, making me feel like an intruder in my own home. Dread settled in the pit of my stomach. The sight that greeted me in the living room stopped me in my tracks. There on our cozy sofa sat Sarah. But she wasn't alone. A man I had never seen before was locked in a passionate embrace with her. Their lips were inches apart, their eyes locked in a desperate longing. Time seemed to stand still as I took in the scene, my mind struggling to process what I was witnessing. They quickly separated, their faces filled with guilt and shock. Sarah's eyes, usually so warm and familiar, were now brimming with tears. The stranger, disheveled and clearly caught off guard, scrambled to gather his belongings. I couldn't speak, my voice had abandoned me, leaving me mute and helpless. Sarah, her cheeks flushed and her hair disarrayed, finally found her words. She stammered, trying to explain herself, but the words seemed to get lost in the air, leaving only the heavy silence between us. The stranger, in a desperate bid to escape this uncomfortable situation, hurriedly made a hasty exit. I watched as he disappeared through the front door, the sound of his hurried footsteps echoing in my ears. Sarah turned to me, her face a portrait of devastation. She began to sob uncontrollably, her tears staining the very couch on which she had betrayed our trust. Her pleas for forgiveness filled the room, a cacophony of remorse and desperation. I demanded to know who the man was and how long this had been going on. My voice, previously lost, had returned with a vengeance. Anger and confusion surged within me, pushing me to seek answers to the questions that were tearing my world apart. Sarah confessed that it had been happening for several months. Months. The word hung heavy in the air, a reminder of the countless lies and deceit that had festered beneath the surface of our marriage. The weight of those months crushed me, leaving me breathless and bewildered. As the tears streamed down Sarah's face, I couldn't help but wonder if there were others involved. Was this a one-time mistake, or had she been living a secret life, hidden from my view? The uncertainty gnawed at my soul, adding another layer of complexity to an already tangled web of emotions. In that moment I faced a choice between forgiveness and vengeance, between rebuilding and tearing it all down. The future of our marriage hung in the balance, and my heart was torn between love and betrayal. My wife Sarah was locked in a passionate embrace with a man I had never seen before. My keys hit the table with a clatter as I stood there, frozen. It was like a scene out of a movie, one I never expected to play out in my own living room. They quickly separated, their faces filled with guilt and shock. Sarah's cheeks flushed crimson, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. The stranger, disheveled and clearly caught off guard, mumbled something unintelligible and began gathering his scattered belongings. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My heart pounded in my chest like a jackhammer, and a million thoughts raced through my mind. Who was this guy, and what the hell was he doing here with my wife? Sarah's eyes welled up with tears as she stammered to explain herself. Her voice quivered, barely audible over the ringing in my ears. I can explain, she managed to choke out, but her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of betrayal. The stranger, in a desperate bid to escape this uncomfortable situation, hurriedly made a hasty exit. I watched him, my anger boiling just beneath the surface. He slinked out the door, and I knew that this was far from over. Turning my gaze back to Sarah, my voice trembled with a mixture of anger and sadness. Explain what, Sarah, I demanded, my hands balled into fists at my sides. Who is he, and how long has this been going on? Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she struggled to find the right words. It's complicated, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Please just let me explain. I felt a tumultuous mix of emotions, anger, betrayal, confusion. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it all. The room felt suffocating, the air heavy with tension. Sarah's explanations were a jumbled mess of half-truths and excuses. She spoke of loneliness, of feeling neglected, but her words couldn't justify what I had just witnessed. The man's presence in our home was a stark reminder that our marriage was far from perfect. As the minutes ticked by, Sarah's tears continued to fall, and my anger began to ebb, replaced by a deep sadness. It was clear that we were both victims of our own failures, our own inability to communicate and connect. But in that moment, with the stranger's presence still lingering in the air, forgiveness seemed like an impossible choice. Our marriage had been shaken to its core, and the path forward was uncertain. Hey there, if you're enjoying this content, please consider giving it a thumbs up and hitting that subscribe button below. Your support helps us create more great videos like this one. Don't forget to also click the notification bell, so you never miss an update from us. Thanks for watching. Sarah began to sob uncontrollably, her tears falling like a torrential rain. I stood there watching her crumble, unable to ignore the raw pain in her eyes. But I needed answers, and they wouldn't come through her tears alone. I need to know, Sarah, I set my voice firm. Who is he, and how long has this been going on? Her sobs continued, but she finally managed to speak between gasps for air. His name is David, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. And it's been happening for several months. My mind raced with questions about how I could have missed the signs. Sarah and I had been together for 7 years, and I thought I knew her better than anyone else. How had I been so blind to this? How had I failed to see the cracks in our marriage? Anger and betrayal swirled inside me, but beneath it all was a deep sense of hurt. I had trusted Sarah with my heart, and now it felt shattered. I took a step back, needing some distance to process everything. My gaze wandered around the room, landing on the family photos on the wall. There we were, smiling in each one, our love captured in frozen moments. How had it all come to this? Sarah's sobs continued to fill the room, a constant reminder of the pain we were both feeling. I turned back to her, my emotions a jumbled mess. Why, Sarah? I asked, my voice cracking with emotion. Why did you do this? She wiped her tears away with the back of her hand and tried to explain herself. I felt neglected, she began, her words hesitant. I thought you didn't care anymore, and David was there for me when I needed someone. I couldn't deny that our marriage had been strained lately. Work, stress, and the daily grind had taken their toll on us. But I never imagined it would lead to this. As I looked at Sarah, her mascara-streaked cheeks and red, swollen eyes, I realized that we were both victims of our own failures. We had let our relationship drift, and now we were paying the price. The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of our shattered trust hanging in the air. The road ahead seemed uncertain, filled with anger, pain, and a profound sense of betrayal. I couldn't help but wonder if there were others involved. The thought gnawed at me like a persistent itch. Was David the only one? Or were there more secrets hidden in the shadows of our marriage? The uncertainty clawed at my insides, making it hard to breathe. Sarah's pleas for another chance tugged at my heartstrings. As she stood there, her tear-stained face filled with regret, I couldn't help but remember the years of love and laughter we had shared. Our journey together had been filled with ups and downs, but I never thought it would come to this. I promise I'll do anything to make it right, she whispered, her voice fragile, like a delicate glass about to shatter. I decided to ask her to leave for the night so I could think. It wasn't a decision I took lightly, but I needed space to clear my head, away from the suffocating atmosphere of our home. Sarah agreed, her eyes filled with resignation and a glimmer of hope. As the door closed behind her, I found myself alone in our once happy home. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint echoes of her pleas for forgiveness. I couldn't escape the weight of the situation, no matter where I turned. I stayed up all night, wrestling with my emotions and doubts. Sleep eluded me as I replayed the scenes from earlier in the evening over and over in my mind. The anger, the betrayal, the heartache, they all swirled together in a maelstrom of confusion. The hours passed like an eternity, and as the first rays of dawn crept through the curtains, I felt a deep exhaustion wash over me. The decision I faced was one of the most significant in my life, and I couldn't make it lightly. With the new day came a sense of clarity. I knew I couldn't let anger and betrayal define the rest of my life. I needed to confront Sarah, to have an honest conversation about the state of our marriage and whether it could ever be rebuilt. The hours had ticked by, but the dawn brought with it the glimmer of a new beginning. A chance to make sense of the tangled mess our lives had become. It wouldn't be easy, but it was time to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The next morning, I couldn't shake off the heaviness in my chest. The sun pierced through the curtains, reminding me that life had to go on, even if it was in disarray. I knew I couldn't simply ignore what had happened the night before. It was time to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I began to investigate further, driven by a need for answers. It felt like a detective's job, a role I had never expected to play in my own life. I searched for evidence of her infidelity, my heart pounding with each discovery. Text messages and emails became my trail of breadcrumbs, leading me deeper into a world I never knew existed. The messages were hidden in plain sight, but their contents were a damning revelation. David's name appeared repeatedly, their words filled with a longing that cut me to the core. Each piece of evidence painted a more painful picture of her deception. The truth was uglier than I could have imagined, and the pit in my stomach deepened with every scroll of my phone's screen. I couldn't fathom how long this betrayal had been going on, but the evidence pointed to a history I had been oblivious to. Finally armed with undeniable proof, I couldn't avoid the confrontation any longer. I found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up as I approached, her face a mask of guilt and fear. I laid the evidence in front of her, each message and email a painful reminder of her betrayal. Her eyes welled up with fresh tears as she realized there was no denying it any longer. "Why, Sarah?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and sorrow. "How could you do this to us?" She didn't have an answer, at least not one that could erase the pain she had caused. Her silence spoke volumes, and the weight of our shattered trust hung heavy in the air. As the tears streamed down her face, I knew that this confrontation was just the beginning of a long and painful journey. Our marriage had been irrevocably changed, and the road ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges. But one thing was clear, I couldn't turn a blind eye to the truth any longer. Sarah swore that it was a mistake and that she wanted to make amends. Her voice trembled as she pleaded for forgiveness. Her eyes locked onto mine as if trying to find a lifeline in my gaze. It was hard to ignore the turmoil in her, the regret for the choices that had brought us to this point. "I messed up big time," she admitted, her words heavy with guilt. "But I love you and I want to fix this, whatever it takes." I sat across from her, torn between the love I had for the woman who had been my partner for 7 years, and the betrayal I couldn't shake off. The idea of rebuilding our marriage felt like an impossible mountain to climb, but there was still a glimmer of hope buried beneath the wreckage. Friends and family started to learn about our marital crisis. It was hard to keep such a deeply personal matter hidden. News of our troubles spread like wildfire, and soon our closest confidants were offering their opinions and advice. Some urged me to give her a second chance, emphasizing the years we had invested in our relationship. They believed in forgiveness and the idea that love could conquer all, even the darkest of secrets. Others questioned if I had played a role in her actions. Doubts began to creep in, and I couldn't help but wonder if I had neglected our marriage without realizing it. Had I been too focused on work and other responsibilities? It was a painful self-examination, one that made me question my own shortcomings. The voices of those around me, well-intentioned as they were, only added to the confusion swirling inside my head. I felt like a ship adrift in a storm, and the decision I faced weighed heavily on my shoulders. Sarah's promises to change and make amends tugged at my heartstrings. It was impossible to forget the love we had shared, the memories we had built together. But the wounds were deep, and the scars would be a permanent reminder of the pain we had endured. As the days passed, I grappled with the choice before me, knowing that whatever decision I made would shape the rest of our lives. Our marriage hung in the balance, teetering on the edge of redemption or dissolution, and no matter which path I chose, there would be no going back to the way things were before. I felt torn between my love for Sarah and the betrayal I had endured. It was a battle raging within me, love clashing with the hurt and anger that had taken root. I wanted to believe that our love could conquer all, but the scars ran deep, and I couldn't ignore the pain that had been inflicted. Sarah suggested we attend couples therapy to work through our issues. It was a step she hoped would bridge the chasm that had opened between us. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the fear of losing the life we had built together. I agreed to give therapy a chance, hoping it would save our marriage. The first session was like stepping into the unknown. Our problems laid bare for a stranger to dissect. The therapist's office was a safe haven, a place where we could lay our truths on the table without fear of judgment. The therapist delved into the deep-seated issues in our relationship. With each session, we peeled back the layers of our history, exposing the wounds we had both inflicted and endured. It was uncomfortable, like cleaning out an old, neglected wound, but it was necessary for healing. As the weeks passed, I struggled with trust and insecurity. The therapist's questions often felt like a magnifying glass, highlighting the doubts and fears that had festered within me. Sarah's attempts to rebuild our trust were met with resistance, and I couldn't help but wonder if the damage was irreversible. The ultimate decision of whether to forgive and rebuild or end the marriage weighed heavily on my mind. Therapy had brought us closer in some ways, but it had also unearthed uncomfortable truths. The love I felt for Sarah still existed, but it was tainted by the knowledge of her betrayal. In the end, the therapist's office became a battleground of emotions. Forgiveness seemed like an elusive goal, and the scars of betrayal ran deep. The decision loomed over us, a storm on the horizon, and I couldn't help but wonder if our love could weather the tempest or if it would be swept away by the winds of change. In the end, it all came down to one pivotal moment, a moment of reckoning that would define the course of our future. The weight of the therapist's words hung in the air as we sat in the small, dimly lit office. Forgiveness, the therapist said, is a choice. It's not about forgetting or condoning the past, but deciding if the love and the history you share are worth the effort to rebuild. I exchanged a glance with Sarah, both of us acutely aware that this was the crossroads we had been hurtling toward. The therapist's words echoed in our minds as we considered the path ahead. The weeks of therapy have been a roller coaster of emotions, forcing us to confront our deepest insecurities and wounds. We had unearthed the root causes of our issues, but the scars of betrayal still lingered. Trust, once shattered, was like a fragile vase glued back together. It might hold, but the cracks would always be visible. Sarah's remorse had been palpable, her efforts to make amends sincere. The love we had shared for so long hadn't vanished, but it had been shaken to its core. The decision weighed on me like a boulder, and it was time to either lift it together or let it crush what remained of our marriage. "I want to try," Sarah said, her voice unwavering as she looked into my eyes. "I want to rebuild what we had, even if it takes a lifetime." The sincerity in her words cut through the doubts that had clouded my judgment. Maybe, just maybe, we could emerge from this crucible stronger than before. I nodded, my own resolve firming. "I want to try too," I admitted, my voice laced with vulnerability. "But know that it won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight." The therapist offered a reassuring smile, a beacon of hope in the storm. "It's a journey, not a destination," she said. "But with commitment, effort, and time, love can overcome even the most daunting of obstacles." As we left the therapist's office that day, we held each other's hands, our fingers interlocked with the promise of a fresh start. The future remained uncertain, and the scars would always remind us of the pain we had endured. But love had the power to heal, to rebuild, and to mend what had been broken. Our journey had just begun, and as we faced the horizon, we did so with hope and determination. The ultimate decision had been made: forgiveness and a second chance, but only time would reveal if our love could indeed weather the tempest and emerge stronger on the other side.